Sony's been busy lately getting the PlayStation VR up off the ground and into store shelves, and with that have come a lot of questions from consumers. What resolution are games going to run at? What frame rate are they going to run at? How is it going to take advantage of PS4 hardware? Is it going to do anything new for PlayStation that PlayStation 4 can't already do on its own? And it looks like we have the answer to at least one of those questions when it comes to frame rates. Sony has made it clear that any publisher or developer that tries to get a game published for PlayStation VR, if that game cannot hit 60 frames per second, or if the game drops below 60 frames per second, they will not publish the game. Their reasoning is that developers have no excuse anymore for games to not be hitting 60 frames per second. The year is 2016, and we still have companies that release games at 30 frames per second, especially native 30 frames per second for games to Sony is considered unacceptable. To me, depending on the type of game, I can deal with it. I can deal with 30 frames per second if the game permits it. If it's the kind of game where it's not a game killer, I'm okay with it. For a lot of people though, they will never take 30 frames per second for an answer. They'll never accept it. And it seems like Sony is siding with them. And this is just going to do good things for gaming as a whole. I mean, Sony is pushing developers to hit 60 frames per second if they want to get their games on their virtual reality hardware. And I'm sure Oculus and HTC, if they haven't done it already, they're doing the exact same thing. I mean, the whole idea of virtual reality is that you feel like you're actually there. Well, if you're living in a world where everything is 30 frames per second, it's going to really take you out of the immersion really quickly. And on a side note, we actually saw a brief bit of gameplay for Paranormal Activity, the VR game from IGN. So, while we already know that games for the PlayStation VR are going to be 60 frames per second, we now know that first-party horror games are already being considered for PlayStation VR. And with the cancellation of Silent Hills, and with games like Allison Road already being made natively for VR, and then games like Visage, not sure. Look it up on Kickstarter though, it's awesome. It's very similar to PT actually. With these horror games being made by third-party developers for VR, and then you have first-party developers actually making horror games for PlayStation VR, then knowing that they're all going to be 60 frames per second. Now obviously that doesn't have anything to do with the gameplay and how well the game's actually going to play, but if the games are 60 frames per second a piece, that tells us that companies are being forced to try harder, to push the boundaries of the hardware that they're working with, and if they can't hit 60 frames per second and they're stuck at 30, Sony's essentially telling them to fuck off, because they don't want those games hindering the experience that players are going to get from playing games on the PlayStation VR. If you ask me, this is going to do really good things for gaming, and not just for VR, because if other companies, as well as Sony themselves, continue to push developers to not just hit 60 frames per second with VR games, but with standalone games, non-VR games, just standard console games, that may bring an end to 30 frames per second, especially on AAA titles, if publishers like Sony are not going to accept them, and companies really want to get their games out there, they're going to need to try a lot harder to make those games the best they can be. Make sure to check out the rest of Coed Gaming. Until next time, take it easy. What's up guys, thanks so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you haven't gotten a chance to already, make sure to check out last week's video, which can be found right here. Also, if you haven't gotten a chance to already, make sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. And while you're at it, make sure to check out the rest of Coed Gaming, where we upload gaming videos every single week. And as always, game on.